Former NFL quarterback Cam Newton had extremely high praise for Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson, calling him the greatest dual threat quarterback. We talk about what he had to say, Luke Kuechly's comments, and so much more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, you can follow along and subscribe as well. We're 5 days a week. Either way you decide to watch or listen, Monday through Friday, plus bonus episodes, live shows after big news and games, as well as so much more. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We bring you Ravens news, analysis, updates, again, so much more here on this show, Monday through Friday. And we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about some comments that were made a little bit earlier in the week and also a bit last week as well. Cam Newton had extremely high praise for Lamar Jackson. Those comments have been making the rounds. We've mentioned them a bit here on this show. I've been trying to really catch up with all the content that's been happening with Lamar over the course of this last week or so. It's been a lot. So we haven't had a chance to really dive into what Cam had to say. Again, we've mentioned it in passing, but haven't really talked about it in depth. So I want to talk about what Cam had to say, dive into the conversation, and talk about the greatest dual threat quarterback of all time and what that means. Then these comments actually became relevant again, Cam's comments, because Luke Kuechly ended up taking Cam over Lamar, which again, Luke Kuechly was Cam Newton's teammate, not necessarily a shock, but we'll compare Cam and Lamar a little bit, not in a bad way or anything, just compare the two and have that conversation as well. And then we'll talk about Joy Taylor, who we talked about LaShawn McCoy and what he had to say defending Lamar Jackson. Joy took another interesting approach about the conversation of if Lamar is overly criticized. So there's lots to dive into. Let's talk about it. Cam Newton. This happened later last week where he was asked, he has the 4th and 1 podcast. It's his podcast. He does a great job with her. And this isn't the first time that Cam has talked about Lamar and the clip has been a talking point. I think Cam does a great job of examining these things and answering questions. So Cam ended up being asked about if he sees himself as the greatest dual threat quarterback of all time. And he said no, pretty decisively, and said it was Lamar. And his reasoning was because he said that Lamar has got the speed. He said, quote, he got speed that I never had, and he's just electric. I played the game more powerful. I can run, but I might probably get caught. Vic, Lamar, they're not getting caught. That's exactly what it is. They're not getting caught. I completely agree with what Cam had to say there. In my opinion, when you talk about guys and not getting caught versus power, it's kind of like the speed versus power thing. So when Cam says, yeah, those guys aren't getting caught, he's right. I mean, Cam was somebody that just played the game a different way. And I think a lot of people with dual threat quarterbacks, some of the worry, I guess, with that play style is almost the fact that, you know, the injuries, right? It's, okay, if they're taking all these hits, then they're going to get injured. The likelihood that they get injured is much higher than that of a quote unquote, like a regular pocket passer and someone who doesn't run as much. When again, I always find that as like, yes, the more you get hit, the more likely it is you get injured, but it goes so far beyond that with these dual threat guys where Cam obviously got injured, right? Cam was somebody that put his body on the line every single play. That was his style. I think he and Josh Allen are more stylistically similar than Lamar and Cam. Both guys super physical. It's a ground and pound thing with them where they have, I guess, quote unquote speed, but it's not Lamar Jackson speed where Lamar is not getting caught. It's not Michael Vick speed where Lamar is not getting caught. The way that Josh Allen and the way that Cam play the game, they are more likely to get injured than the way that Lamar or Mike Vick played it, in my opinion, just because they put their body on the line more. During Lamar's rookie season, he was fighting for that extra yard, putting his body on the line. And one, he just wasn't built like that. Cam was. Josh Allen is. Lamar's not. And that's fine because both have their pros and cons to their style. But it's this notion of, and we'll talk about this in the third part of the show because I think Joy Taylor made some points about this, but dual threat quarterbacks at the end of the day, they're not considered dual threat quarterbacks. And what I mean by that is they're looked at with their running ability first. That's what it is, where there's such a predisposed distinction of what this position is supposed to be, what the quarterback position is supposed to be. Oh, well, they're supposed to be able to stand in the pocket and just throw the ball, which Lamar can do, by the way. But again, it's, oh, well, he runs the ball. So can he really do that? Can he really? Yes, he can. Yes, he can do that. But I think Cam, in terms of saying, oh, well, Lamar, he's the greatest. First of all, it takes a big person to be able to do that because obviously in order, the mindset when you're playing for a lot of these guys is, yeah, you're trying to be the best, you're trying to be the greatest. You have to have an immense confidence level in yourself. But for Cam, and I think the argument against him is that his quote unquote prime, and we talked about this on yesterday's show, but his prime didn't really last super duper long. And I'll pull up his stats quickly here as we talk about it. But for Cam, we know that 15-1 season Carolina had. He led them to the Super Bowl. And leading a team to a Super Bowl is a big deal. Now, again, it's not the biggest deal in the world. We've talked about that with Joe Burrow, where, sure, you give Joe Burrow credit for doing it. You give Cam credit for doing it, but you didn't win the big game. So, obviously, it's one thing to lead a team to the Super Bowl. It's another thing to actually win the game. But for Cam, he had, if you want to pull up how many good years he had, I mean, I guess it was those last three. So Carolina, then he went to New England, obviously, then he went back to Carolina for a little bit. Those 3 years from 2019 to 2021 were just kind of like, not so great. But I think when he entered the league in 2011, all the way till 2018, those were good years. So he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He had 8 good years, 8 good NFL years, which is great. He won accolades. He won awards. So was Lamar. But the difference here is Lamar still has that upward trajectory, right? And I think that might have factored into Cam's decision too, where obviously he was talking more about the stylistic play of the two and what the differences were between when he played and what his style was versus Lamar and his style right now. But Lamar is entering year 7. Obviously, his rookie year, he didn't start the whole year. He only started half the year. So Lamar is entering right now his 6th year of starting fully, right? Full-time starter for the first time in 2019. But even despite the fact that he's 27, which is so crazy to think about, it feels like Lamar is going to have more of a prime. He's just entering his prime right now, but more good years, I guess, than Cam will. And so we'll compare the two in the second part of the show. We did this on yesterday's show too, and we had a mini conversation about it. But just diving more into devoting a segment to Cam's comments, devoting a segment to Kuechly's comments. At this point, yes, I would consider Lamar the greatest dual threat quarterback. And it's tough for me because usually I like to reserve that conversation for retired players where it's like, okay, obviously when Lamar retires, he will be the greatest. But I mean, I think we're at a point now where Lamar has 2 MVPs. He has all of these records that are broken. Obviously, the thing that would beef up his resume and beef up his case would be the playoff success, would be the Super Bowl, right? I think that is the next step on the agenda for Lamar, and hopefully he is able to get there with and do all that. But to me, I think that Cam is right. And he could have easily said, yes, I consider myself the greatest. I have that confidence level in myself, and that's what it is. So I have to give props to Cam for speaking the way that he really feels and figuring everything. But this isn't like Lamar's better than Cam. No, Cam was a really good player. Cam was really fun to watch. He's a guy that, we talk about all these mobile guys and these dual threat quarterbacks and kind of how they have set the tone for each other, whether you talk about Steve Young, Vic, Cam, Lamar. And again, Obviously, there are more. Those are just the four that I named. But to me, the term dual threat, Cam was a guy that used that differently. Lamar's a guy that used every guy uses that differently. Where you talk about guys like Josh Allen, and he's a dual threat guy, but again, it just feels like some criticisms here and there for some guys versus others, Cam versus others, Lamar versus others, Vic, etc. It's different. But I do think that at the end of the day, Cam, his decision, I guess, was the correct one with Lamar, but that doesn't take away from what he accomplished over the course of his career. Coming up, though, we'll talk about what Luke Kuechly thinks about the situation, Cam's former teammate over in Carolina. We talked about it yesterday, but we'll get into more of a detailed conversation about it, so be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to MLB games during the summer, especially here in Baltimore with the Orioles, and I have a ton of memories from my childhood, from games I attended with my dad in the past. That was a big part of my life, and of course, I'm still going to games. I try to get to a few every season, and that's really fun, making new memories. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. On the Gametime app, there are plenty of games. The Orioles under the All-Star break is coming up, but they have a big series with the Yankees coming up, and then that playoff stretch after the All-Star break. And for me, of course, I'd love to go to those AL East games. It's really big. And of course, for Baltimore, with that playoff stretch coming down the line, every game counts. And for me, the Gametime app has a lot of features, and I have a lot of favorite ones. My big favorite, though, last-minute deals. You can save about 6% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. Plus, the app is just super easy to use in general and easy to navigate around. Other features include flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views, lowest price guarantee, Gametime ticket coverage, and so much more. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off first purchase. So buy again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spell LOCKED on NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime to the last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this midweek edition of the show. Really appreciate everybody for being here again, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day. As always, whether you're an everyday and you tune in every single day, thank you so much for being here every single day with me. If you're new to the channel, welcome in. Hopefully you're enjoying the content. Be sure to like and subscribe. And also, if you're somewhere in the middle, welcome back. Be sure to also check out Locked On Sports Today with Peter Bukowski, who takes you all across the sports world. And he does a great job. Of course, that is also on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We talked about Cam Newton's comments in the first part of the show. And again, those particular ones were made later in the week last week. But it is important to me to kind of dedicate some time to each of that and not just kind of gloss over it, kind of dedicate a show or part of a show to it, at least a segment where I didn't get the opportunity to do that because there's just been so much Lamar discourse and conversation. So we talked about Mark Schlereth and we talked about LaShawn McCoy. And so we're making our way down the line, but I promise there is going to be the Ravens rookies report on July 13th. So they report on Saturday. We're going to have some rookies to watch and some positional battles to watch rookie wise and training camp content. We're moving along to that coming up in the next couple of days. So excited to break down all of that. But the reason that these Cam Newton comments became almost sort of relevant again, and the fact that these last week comments are now into this week, is the fact that Luke Kuechly on Monday ended up commenting about the, Cam Newton versus Lamar Jackson debate on the Kay Adams show. And we did talk about this a bit yesterday, but he ended up talking a lot about Cam and Lamar. And in his answer, obviously he took Cam, which doesn't shock me, right? That's his guy. That's his former teammate. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you should have taken Lamar. No, that's his guy. Like, obviously, in the grand scheme of things with the conversation, I would still take Lamar. But Luke Kuechly obviously played with Cam. He was close with Cam. And the fact that he picked Cam, again, just is not a shock to me. Now, the reasoning, and we'll get into what he actually had to say and what his comments were, but essentially it was about the style and the stylistic play that Luke Kuechly saw up close when going to battle with Cam. Now, obviously, Luke, when he played in Carolina, didn't have to tackle Cam or any of that, but he ended up saying for Lamar's a pain to tackle, to get your hands on, to keep in the pocket, but you can get him. You can get him on the ground. He said with Cam, it's like a good luck type of thing. He's running through you. And that's the stylistic part of it, where I think a lot of people, if you had a choice between getting ran over by a quarterback and getting juked out by a quarterback, I think a lot of people would choose to get juked out. I think there was a certain element of Cam's game that I don't want to use the word terrifying for defenders, because I don't think that's it's a part of his game that if you're a defender, you have to look out for, because it adds an extra element of physicality. Usually it's the defense being super physical, right? Not all the time. Obviously, the offensive line can be physical, wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, whatnot. But when you talk about the quarterback, again, we talk about what the typical quarterback is, the quote-unquote typical quarterback. They don't bring physicality. Cam brought that physicality. Josh Allen brings that physicality, right? It's that style of dual threat with the physicality added in where, it's almost the mindset of I'm going to run you over and there's nothing you can do about it. That's what Cam played with. That style, again, I think is more prone to injury than what Vic, that style is. But again, anybody can get injured in the league. Football's a physical sport. Guys get injured in the pocket all the time. Guess what? Lamar Jackson has 2 season-ending injuries in the pocket, throwing the ball. It is what it is. I think a lot of people have this preconceived notion that, like, oh, just because Cam took all those hits means he was injured every single season, every single time. Everybody in football is injured every season. Everybody is. It's just a matter of who pops up on the injury report and who has serious injuries. Everybody's dinged up. Everybody's banged up. Cam certainly was. Lamar has been as well. We know that. But to me, I do think that Cam had that element of physicality that Lamar doesn't. And that's fine, because Lamar has the element of speed that Cam didn't. And Cam acknowledged that. Luke Kuechly acknowledged that. I think overall this was it was a healthy conversation both ways. Again, Cam acknowledging Lamar, Luke Kuechly saying, hey, you know what, there was an element to Cam's game where he's taking him over Lamar. Sure, you know what, that's his opinion. And I'm not going to sit up here and say, oh, well, you can't take Cam because you're just factually wrong. It's opinion-based, you know? Do you favor physicality? Do you favor the speed? Now, to me, I think when Lamar is retired, when this is all said and done, it's going to be a much clearer conversation of, oh, yeah, peak Lamar, there's not a question. I think for some people, there is that. And obviously, if there is a Super Bowl involved in that, the answer becomes much easier. But again, Lamar is 27 years old. He's entering year 6 of starting. Cam had 8 good seasons. We just talked about that in the first part of the show. Cam had 8 good seasons. A lot of this is stylistic stuff, right? But when you actually look at the stats, and we did this yesterday, but I will do it again today just for the context, and maybe people who didn't catch yesterday's show, I'll run through the actual comparisons for Cam and Lamar statistically, which again has something to do with offense too, right? It's just the way Lamar and his offense, it's not necessarily a high-powered passing offense. For Cam, obviously, he threw the ball a lot more than Lamar. And so that will reflect in the stats and obviously in some of the rushing stats as well. Cam played 148 games, right? Lamar's only played in 86. So again, there is a clear difference in games. Lamar has the better quarterback record overall, 58-19 compared to 75-68-1 for Cam Newton. Lamar hasn't tied a game in his career. Hopefully it stays that way. I do not like ties at all. Lamar has a better completion percentage than Cam. Lamar has 64.5, Cam at 59.9. Cam, obviously, with being in the league longer, throwing more balls, 32,382 passing yards compared to Lamar's 15,887. Lamar averages more passing yards per attempt, 7.5 to 7.2. Cam had more passing yards per game, naturally, 218.8 to 184.7. Cam playing more seasons, more passing touchdowns, 194 to 125. Cam had 123 interceptions over the course of his career. Lamar 45. Now that is a product of the offense, right? You throw the ball less opportunities for interceptions, right? Cam certainly was turnover prone, but again, Lamar doesn't throw the ball as much as Cam did. Rating, Lamar 98, Cam 85.2. Cam had more rushing attempts, 1118, sorry, to 875. Rushing yards, Cam had 5628. Lamar right now is at 5258. So naturally, Lamar has more rushing yards per attempt, 6-5. Cam had 75 rushing touchdowns. Lamar has 29. I think part of that is Cam was more, well, I shouldn't say that. I'll say Cam was able to get more touchdown opportunities in that offense rushing the ball because of the lack of running backs. Yeah, not that he didn't have running backs. Obviously, he had good ones. But Lamar, Gus Edwards had 13 touchdowns last season. Cam wasn't the only running player that could make that happen, right? Cam was surrounded by good running talent alongside him being good running talent. Lamar, same thing. But Lamar certainly got involved over touchdowns, or I guess you could say Lamar vultures the running back for touchdowns. If you want to flip that around, I wouldn't blame you. But again, they also have accolades. They have championships. Cam won the MVP, right? Lamar has one more, but, Cam also won one. Lamar is a 2-time All-Pro. Cam was a 1-time All-Pro. Both made 3 Pro Bowls. Cam actually won the Offensive Player of the Year, so he has that over Lamar. It's a more even conversation than people think. But I do think that when it's all said and done, it will be much more lopsided. So you can take Cam, you can take Lamar. I'm taking Lamar. You can talk about stylistic, which style you prefer of a dual threat quarterback. Do you prefer physicality? Do you prefer the speed threat? There was an element of both for both, but obviously Cam was the more physical one and Lamar is the speedier one there. So it's interesting because, again, you have Cam outright saying that Lamar is the greatest. Luke Kuechly obviously picking his teammate. And I do think overall, conversations like those, there's no ill intent. There's no maliciousness in all of that, right? It's just like, okay, this is my opinion. That's fine. We talk about it and we move on, right? There are no shots being taken by Luke Kuechly or Cam or any of that, right? It's Cam acknowledging Lamar. It's Luke Kuechly taking his guy, and that's that. So I actually thought that was a very civil and respectful conversation, which, again, you always love to have those. Coming up, though, we'll talk about another conversation about Lamar. Joy Taylor defends Lamar and also gives some interesting points about the dual threat quarterback position in general. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about here on the show. We're back. Our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher is still here with you on this Wednesday edition of the show. Really appreciate everybody being here again. Be sure to like and subscribe, video form, audio form. We have all this Ravens content for you coming up. I've done this show now for almost 5 years. We're coming up on my 5-year anniversary here. So all the way back in 2019, it is crazy to think about where this team has been since then, how the show has evolved since then. Man, it's been quite a journey. I'll say that. So if you want to be along for the ride, we just hit 7,000 subscribers on YouTube. You can hit the like button to subscribe again over here. If you're an audio listener and you've been with me since the beginning, really appreciate you for being here. If you're new to the channel, though, of course, I appreciate you as well, whether you are in video form or in audio form. If you want to be on the road to 8K in video form, be sure to hit that subscribe button. So Joy Taylor, in the same vein of the conversation we had about LaShawn McCoy, where he defended Lamar, saying that he gets overly criticized and has this unfair criticism, Joy Taylor, who was also on that panel, agreed. And we're going to have this conversation because I thought Joy brought up multiple interesting points about the quarterback position, particularly the dual threat aspect of everything and how people perceive, I guess, running quarterbacks. And that's the first issue, right? Dual threat quarterbacks are perceived as running quarterbacks. And that's what I talked about in the first part of the show, where I think there is such a particular stereotype of what this position should look like. And it's not fair to the dual threat quarterbacks because they are already put into a light of, oh, well, they can run the ball this effectively. They might as well just be running backs, or they can't throw the ball because they can run so effectively. Those are not true. They're not true. Obviously, some players are more fit to be quarterbacks than others. Some players are not worthy of being NFL quarterbacks. They don't have those skill sets. That's fine. But when a player consistently shows you over and over again, whether it be in college, whether it be in the pros, that they have arm talent along with leg talent, it's alongside. It's not one or the other. They can do both. Hence the name dual threat. It's disingenuous to basically throw out one of the things they do well. These guys are quarterbacks that can run. They're not running backs that can throw. That's the difference. But they're being treated as running backs that can throw. And that's not fair to them. So Joy ended up talking about how she also believes Lamar is overly criticized and unfairly criticized. But the point that she made was that she said, quote, "We haven't really adjusted our brains to evaluate running quarterbacks yet." And talked a lot about how the position, there is a preconceived notion of what it should be. Talked about Jalen Hurts a little bit and like, oh, these push touchdowns. Like, how many of those should we account for? Whenever a quarterback runs the ball, picks up yards with their legs, and they do it as much as Lamar does, Josh Allen, some of these other guys. Now, Lamar obviously gets more criticism than a lot of these other guys that also are dual threat quarterbacks. But that's on a lot of, again, preconceived notions and agendas and points that were made during Lamar's college career and even high school career. We're entering the league. I've said this over and over. I've said it multiple times this week. So if you're an everydayer, you've heard me say it before. But Lamar was very raw as a passer coming out of college. Doesn't mean he couldn't throw the ball, but there was a ways to go in terms of certain aspects of his game that needed improvement. And that's not even just about his arm talent. It was also about him as a player in general. Coming out of school, he needed some work. And guess what? He put in the work, and he is one of the best quarterbacks in the league now. But those same points from college, from the draft, from his early NFL days, still follow him today because either people don't like the way that he plays, people can't accept the way that he plays, or guess what? I'll say this again too. I've said it all the time. If you pick up 6 yards with your arm or you pick up 6 yards with your legs, guess what? You're picking up 6 yards. It doesn't matter how. I think anybody who is a fan of any team, if you could score a touchdown with a quarterback who's running the ball as opposed to kicking a field goal, going 3 and out in the red zone with a quarterback that threw it 3 straight times, they'd pick the touchdown. Why? Because how do you win football games? You score points. How do you score points? Any way you can. Talented football players find ways to score points. Now, Lamar happens to be able to do it with his arm and with his legs. He's able to throw the ball effectively and run the ball effectively. But I do not think that the general NFL public has been able to shift their mindset. A lot of people have, but it's still very prominent of, oh, well, the quarterback position is a guy who stands in the pocket 24/7, doesn't run the ball. That is the typical quarterback play, strong arms. Like it's all of these other, and there are so many other things I didn't even mention in there about just all of these like general topics of what a quarterback should look like. And it's just, we're so far past that. We've been so far past that, even before Lamar came in the league. But there are still people that can't get over it. And there are still people that can't accept that, hey, you know what? Sure, maybe Lamar hasn't had the playoff success that he's needed to, especially as a 2-time MVP. And is that all on Lamar? No. Lamar has to be better, and you have to acknowledge he has to. But it's not all on Lamar that the playoff success hasn't gone the way. Obviously, the coaches play a part in that. They can be blamed, much like Lamar can be blamed. We are going to blame Lamar, but we are also going to blame the coaching staff and blame other aspects of this team as well, because playoff success or failure does not lie with one person, does not lie with one positional group. So we can acknowledge Lamar can be better, but for Lamar, it's because the stats aren't there. It's because he hasn't played very well. Whereas, for example, Josh Allen has. Josh Allen's playoff stats are much better than Lamar, but Lamar and Josh both haven't made a Super Bowl. And obviously, since Josh's stats are better in the playoffs, people talk about Josh, I guess, in a more positive light. I mean, is it because it's all these different reasons, and it's not fair to Lamar? But again, it's like these other quarterbacks who are coming in the league now, and we're seeing more and more dual threat guys enter the league, but they are being entered in and they are having all this stuff said about them. They're being called running quarterbacks instead of dual threat quarterbacks. That's the difference. And that tells you a lot, in my opinion, because even though I think they're using the term in terms of, okay, yeah, they're running quarterbacks. They can throw the ball and run the ball. The reality is, if you call someone a running quarterback, it's, yes, they are being treated as a player that can throw the ball, but it's really just, a runner, which is not true. Now, obviously, when people use the term running quarterback, not everybody means it that way. I'm not trying to box everybody in who uses running quarterback in that way, but I do think Joy is right, where the discourse around dual threat guys is not the same as just these regular pocket passers, which, by the way, Lamar can throw from the pocket. I try to say that every time I can here, especially during these conversations, because I think another notion is like, oh, yeah, he's running the football, so he can't stand in the pocket and just deliver dots. But he can. He's a quarterback. right? He's a quarterback that happens to also be able to pick up yards with his legs and be effective. That's a part of his game. It's a part of his identity. And he's being punished for being good at something, essentially. So with that criticism, when you talk about Lamar, and now he only has, 185 passing yards one game, 165 the next. That's not the typical quarterback stat line, right? He's not throwing the ball 40 times a game. And that's on predication of the offense. The offense just isn't that. Lamar doesn't get opportunities to throw the ball 40 times a game. If he did, guess what? He'd have more passing yards. He'd have more passing touchdowns. He'd have more interceptions also, right? That's just the proxy of throwing the ball more. But the offense isn't built that way. The Ravens have built their offense around Lamar to be able to highlight his ability both as a runner and as a thrower, being able to do both. Because if you only use one, you are limiting yourself. If you say to Lamar, you're only going to be a thrower or you're only going to be a runner, that limits what Lamar Jackson can do. That limits his potential, limits his ability, it limits your chances to win a Super Bowl. So Lamar gets punished for being good at something, whereas others do not. And a lot of it is, I think, because the preconceived notions of who he was as a passer in college, which was still fine. He just needed work to be able to be a consistent NFL thrower, but he put in the work, and we're still here having this conversation. So I know it's frustrating for a lot of people. I know Lamar, tunes it out, and it's whatever. But again, he's somebody that doesn't deserve as much criticism as he gets. And so for LaShawn McCoy, for Troy Taylor, they both echoed that sentiment. And again, another good conversation to have there. And, again, glad these points are being brought up. But that's all I have here today on Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate you tuning in again. I'm going to get back here tomorrow. More Ravens content. We'll be back here. So be sure to subscribe, follow along video form and audio form for your daily Ravens content. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.